Ethan Holden had built his life around control. Every decision calculated, every risk measured, every outcome predicted. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment he pulled a drowning little girl from the pool, only to look into her wide, terrified blue eyes and see his own staring back at him. Ethan Holden had attended more corporate events and exclusive gatherings than he could count. They all blurred together, the same luxury venues, the same perfectly curated guest lists, the same surface-level conversations about stocks, market trends, and investments. Tonight was no different. A private charity gala at an upscale country club, where business moguls and socialites sipped expensive champagne and made carefully veiled deals over gourmet hors d'oeuvres. Ethan was used to it. He thrived in these circles. But as he stood near the pool, casually listening to a partner discuss an upcoming merger, his mind was elsewhere. The evening was warm, and the soft glow of lanterns reflected off the water, giving everything an almost surreal golden hue. The rhythmic chatter of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, the distant hum of a jazz band, it was all background noise. He had learned to tune it out long ago. He was about to excuse himself and step away for a moment of fresh air when something cut through the comfortable monotony of the evening. A sharp, panicked scream. It took him a second to process the sound. Then another second to register where it had come from. His gaze snapped toward the pool just as a splash sent water rippling outward. The people around him turned, some gasping, others frozen in shock. In the deep end of the pool, a small child was struggling. Her tiny hands clawed at the surface, her mouth open in a silent cry, her golden blonde hair fanning out in the water. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. For a second, no one moved. It was as if the entire gathering had collectively forgotten how to react. A woman let out a strangled cry, but she didn't move forward. Others just stood there, stunned, waiting for someone else to act. Ethan didn't wait. He was already moving. His jacket hit the ground as he rushed forward, and without hesitation, he dove into the pool. The cold water engulfed him instantly, but his body moved on instinct. He pushed forward, reaching the girl just as she slipped under. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her upward as he kicked hard toward the surface. When they broke through the water, she was coughing, gasping, her small fingers gripping his shirt in desperation. "I've got you," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You're okay." He held her securely as he swam toward the edge of the pool. Strong hands reached down, someone finally reacting, and helped lift her out of the water. Ethan followed, hoisting himself onto the deck, water dripping from his clothes as he knelt beside her. The girl was trembling, her breaths coming in short gasps. Her blue eyes, strikingly bright even in the dim evening light, were wide with shock. A second later, a woman pushed through the gathered crowd, her heels clattering against the stone pavement as she rushed toward them. "Emmy! Oh my God, baby!" Ethan barely had time to register the name before the woman dropped to her knees beside the little girl. Her hands shook as she cupped the child's face, brushing wet strands of hair away with frantic, tender movements. The girl, Emmy, blinked up at her, her breathing still uneven. "Mommy," she murmured, her voice small and shaky. "The man saved me." Ethan looked up at the mother, ready to reassure her that Emmy was going to be fine. But the words died in his throat the moment their eyes met. "Cassie." His entire body went still. For a second, he thought he was imagining it, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But there was no mistaking her. Even after 6 years, she looked exactly the same. Dark brown hair that framed her face, deep brown eyes filled with panic and relief, the same expression she used to have when she was trying to hide her emotions but failing miserably. His pulse thundered in his ears as realization hit him like a wrecking ball. Emmy. Cassie's daughter. Cassie's daughter with blonde hair. Cassie's daughter with his blue eyes. His mouth felt dry as he stared at the little girl again, his mind racing so fast he could barely keep up. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. And yet, the resemblance was undeniable. Cassie seemed to realize it at the same time he did. Her entire body tensed, her breath hitching, as though she had just been caught in a lie she had been keeping for years. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan forced himself to swallow, to push through the storm of emotions crashing over him. He had to be sure. Cassie, his voice was rough, almost unrecognizable to himself. Is she? She shot up to her feet, suddenly on high alert. No, she said too quickly, shaking her head. No. Thank you for helping her, Ethan. I appreciate it. But we have to go. She bent down, scooping Emmy into her arms. The little girl wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, still shaken but no longer crying. Ethan stood, his muscles tense, his mind screaming at him to stop her. He couldn't let her just walk away. Not this time. Not without answers. Wait, he said sharply. Cassie, stop. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then she turned away. Cassie. His voice was louder now, demanding. He took a step forward, his heart pounding. Tell me the truth. Is she my daughter? She froze. The crowd was silent around them, but Ethan barely noticed. He could see it in her posture, in the way her fingers curled protectively around Emmy's back, in the way she refused to look at him. That was all the answer he needed. Cassie took a deep breath, then finally turned her head slightly, just enough to whisper the one word that changed everything. Goodbye, Ethan. And then she walked away. Ethan stood there, his clothes still soaked, water dripping onto the stone pavement beneath him, but he barely noticed. His pulse thundered in his ears as he watched Cassie disappear into the crowd, Emmy still wrapped tightly in her arms. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a crushing force. He had just saved a little girl from drowning, and now, in the span of a few minutes, he had been hit with the impossible realization that she might be his daughter. The logical part of his brain demanded answers. It screamed at him to chase after Cassie, to force her to tell him the truth, to demand why she had kept this from him. But his body refused to move. He was still processing the shock, his mind racing through every possibility, every memory, every moment from 6 years ago that could explain how he had a child he had never known about. He had spent years wondering why Cassie left. One day, she had been there, the woman he thought he was going to marry, the only person who had ever made him think about a future outside of his career. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. No explanations, no fights, no warning, just a short note saying she was sorry and that it was for the best. He had looked for her, tried to understand, but eventually, he had convinced himself that she had simply chosen a different life. Now he knew that wasn't the truth. A hand landed on his shoulder, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see one of his business partners, Ryan, looking at him with concern. Hey, man. You okay? That was intense. Ethan blinked, forcing himself to nod. Yeah. I'm fine. Ryan studied him for a second before lowering his voice. You know her? Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. Yeah, he admitted. I do. Ryan raised an eyebrow. And the kid? Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't know, he said, and the weight of those words nearly crushed him. He didn't wait for Ryan's response. He turned and walked away, his mind already forming a plan. He needed to find Cassie. He needed to hear the truth from her own lips. The next morning, Ethan was at his desk, his laptop open in front of him, his fingers tapping against the surface as he waited for a search to load. He had barely slept. The moment he got home the night before, he had started looking for her. He had connections, resources, access to the kind of information most people couldn't get their hands on. It hadn't taken long to track her down. Cassie Brooks. Senior editor at a small publishing house in the city. She had been living in New York for 3 years. 3 years. That meant she had moved here long before their paths had accidentally crossed at the gala. Which also meant she had never intended for him to find out about Emmy. The thought made his stomach twist. He grabbed his phone, staring at the number he had found for her. He could call. He could demand answers right now. But something told him she wouldn't pick up. She had been running from him for years. Why would she stop now? No, he needed to do this in person. Less than an hour later, Ethan was stepping into the quiet, cozy office of the publishing house where Cassie worked. It was a far cry from the corporate skyscrapers he was used to, smaller, more personal, filled with bookshelves and framed quotes about storytelling. It suited her. A receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Cassie Brooks," he said. "Is she available?" The woman hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" Ethan forced a polite smile. "It's personal. She'll want to see me." The receptionist still looked unsure, but she nodded and picked up the phone. A moment later, she gestured toward a hallway. "Second office on the left." Ethan thanked her and walked toward the door. He didn't knock. He stepped inside and found Cassie sitting at her desk, a pen in her hand, her brows furrowed as she reviewed a manuscript. She looked up. The moment her eyes met his, he saw the flicker of panic. "Ethan," she breathed, setting down the pen. "What are you doing here?" He closed the door behind him. "We need to talk." Cassie exhaled, already shaking her head. "Ethan, Is she mine?" The words came out sharp, cutting straight through whatever excuse she had been about to make. "Tell me the truth, Cassie. Is Emmy my daughter?" She closed her eyes for a second, as if bracing herself, then looked at him again. He saw the battle in her expression, the part of her that wanted to keep running, and the part of her that knew she couldn't anymore. "Yes," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan felt his breath catch. He had known it. He had seen it in Emmy's eyes. But hearing it out loud was different. It sent a wave of emotions crashing over him, anger, betrayal, shock, something dangerously close to heartbreak. "Why?" His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. "Why did you keep her from me?" Cassie swallowed hard, gripping the edge of her desk. "Because you had your whole life planned out, Ethan. Your career, your ambitions, there was no room for a baby. I knew if I told you, you'd feel obligated to stay, and I couldn't do that to you." His hands clenched into fists. "That wasn't your choice to make." She let out a shaky breath. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" His voice rose slightly. "You took away 4 years, Cassie. 4 years of my daughter's life. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I do," she whispered. "I've regretted it every day." Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding. He wanted to be furious. He wanted to yell, to demand why she had stolen those years from him. But more than anything, he wanted to know his daughter. "I want to see her," he said, his voice firm. "I want to be in her life." Cassie hesitated. "Ethan, No," he cut her off. "No more running. No more excuses. I lost 4 years. I'm not losing another day." Cassie wiped at her eyes, her expression unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she gave a small nod. "One day," she said quietly. "We'll start with 1 day." It wasn't enough. But it was a start. Ethan had always been a man who took control of every situation. He built his empire from the ground up by making bold decisions, by never hesitating, by always knowing his next move before anyone else did. But as he stood in front of Cassie's apartment door the next morning, waiting for her to open it, He realized this was the first time in his life that he had no idea what to expect. He had barely slept the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind raced with the same thoughts, the same unanswered questions. What had Emmy's first word been? What had she looked like when she took her first steps? What kind of things made her laugh? He had missed all of it, for years of moments he would never get back, and the weight of that loss settled in his chest like a lead anchor. The door opened, and there she was. Cassie looked tired, as if she hadn't slept much either. She was dressed casually in jeans and a soft sweater, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. There was hesitation in her eyes, but also resignation. She had agreed to this, and now there was no turning back. "She's in the living room," Cassie said softly, stepping aside. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat and walked in. The apartment was warm and inviting, nothing like the cold, modern spaces he was used to. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with colorful children's books mixed with Cassie's own collection. A few framed drawings, clearly made by small hands, were taped to the fridge. The scent of something sweet lingered in the air, as if cookies had been baked recently. And then he saw her. Emmy was sitting on the floor, her small legs crossed as she carefully stacked wooden blocks into a tiny castle. Her golden blonde hair fell in soft waves around her face, and her bright blue eyes, his blue eyes, were focused with deep concentration. She hadn't noticed him yet. Ethan felt his breath hitch. She was so small. So delicate. And yet, there was something familiar in the way she furrowed her brow in determination, something that sent a strange mix of warmth and heartbreak through him. Cassie cleared her throat. "Emmy, sweetheart." The little girl looked up, her expression curious. Cassie gave her a gentle smile. "Remember how I told you someone special was coming to visit today?" Emmy's gaze shifted to Ethan. She studied him with an intensity that caught him off guard, as if she was trying to figure out exactly who he was before deciding what to do next. Then, to his utter surprise, she tilted her head and said, "You're the man who saved me." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Yeah," he said, his voice softer than he expected. "That was me." Emmy blinked, considering this. Then she looked at Cassie. "Mommy said you know us." Ethan forced himself to stay calm, to let Cassie lead the conversation. He knew this wasn't something that could be rushed. "I do," he said carefully. "I've known your mommy for a long time." Emmy stared at him for another moment before nodding, as if deciding that this answer was acceptable. Then, completely unfazed, she patted the floor next to her. "Do you want to help me build?" Ethan hesitated only a second before moving forward and lowering himself to the floor. He was still in his usual dress shirt and slacks, but he didn't care. If his daughter wanted him to build a castle, then that's exactly what he was going to do. "What are we building?" he asked, reaching for a block. "A princess castle," Emmy announced proudly. "But it needs to be really big." Ethan smiled. "Got it. Biggest castle ever." Cassie sat on the couch, watching them, her expression unreadable. Ethan knew this wasn't easy for her. She had spent years raising Emmy alone, protecting her, keeping this world separate from the one he had lived in. Now, in a matter of days, that wall was crumbling. For the next hour, Ethan let Emmy take charge, following her instructions as they carefully stacked blocks into a towering structure. She was full of energy, talking non-stop about her favorite books, her best friend at preschool, the pink bicycle she was hoping to get for her next birthday. He soaked in every word, committing every detail to memory. At one point, she looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he said carefully. "Just you." Emmy blinked. "Oh," she said simply, as if filing that information away for later. Then she smiled. "That's good. You can help me with my castle more." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Sounds like a deal." After a while, Cassie stood. "Lunch time," she said. "Emmy, go wash your hands." The little girl scrambled to her feet and ran off down the hall. Ethan watched her go, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to belonging. Cassie exhaled, rubbing her temples. "That went better than I expected." Ethan turned to her. "She's incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Cassie's gaze softened. "She is." He hesitated before speaking again. "Cassie. I need to be in her life. I don't know how yet, but I need to figure it out." Cassie was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll take it one step at a time." It wasn't a perfect answer. But for now, it was enough. Ethan had never been good at waiting. He was used to immediate results, to making a decision and watching it unfold exactly the way he planned. That was how he had built his career, how he had climbed to the top while others hesitated. But this, earning a place in his daughter's life, wasn't something that could be rushed. Cassie had made that clear when she told him they would take things one step at a time, and as much as it frustrated him, he knew she was right. Over the next few weeks, he spent as much time with Emmy as Cassie allowed. It started with short visits, an hour at the park, lunch at a small cafe, sitting on the floor of Cassie's apartment helping Emmy put together puzzles. Every time he saw her, he learned something new. She hated peas but loved strawberries. She had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hop who had to sleep next to her every night. She liked to dance when she thought no one was watching. She was smart, funny, and stubborn in a way that reminded him so much of himself that it was almost unsettling. One afternoon, they sat together at a small table in a children's play area inside a bookstore. Emmy had a coloring book open in front of her, carefully filling in a picture of a princess while Ethan watched. He had never thought he would be the kind of man to sit in a bookstore with a 4-year-old, handing her different colored crayons while she debated which shade of pink was best, but now he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "Are you coming again tomorrow?" Emmy asked without looking up. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Cassie, who was sitting on a nearby bench with a cup of coffee in her hands. She had given him space with Emmy, but he could feel her listening. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said carefully. "That's up to your mom." Emmy finally looked at him, her blue eyes serious. "I think you should come." Ethan felt his heart squeeze. "I'd like that too," he admitted. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to coloring. Ethan glanced at Cassie again, and this time she met his eyes. There was something in her expression, hesitation, but also something softer, something that told him she was beginning to trust him. Later that evening, as they stood outside the bookstore, Ethan walked Cassie and Emmy to their car. Emmy was tired, her small hand wrapped around her mother's as she yawned. "Ethan," Cassie said quietly once Emmy was settled in her car seat. He turned to her, waiting. "You should come tomorrow." His chest tightened. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a step forward, a sign that she was finally letting him in. "I'll be there," he promised. As he watched them drive away, he realized that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work or deals or deadlines. He was thinking about bedtime stories, about small hands gripping his, about the way Emmy's eyes lit up when she saw him. He was thinking about the future. And this time, it wasn't just his own. Ethan arrived at Cassie's apartment the next afternoon, feeling something unfamiliar, a nervous energy that he wasn't used to. He had closed million-dollar deals without hesitation, faced down corporate sharks without blinking, but standing in front of Cassie's door, waiting for it to open, he felt something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was because, for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control of the outcome. When the door opened, Cassie stood there, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, her dark brown eyes scanning his face as if trying to gauge whether she had made the right decision in inviting him over. She still wasn't sure about this. He could see it in the way she hesitated before stepping aside to let him in. "She's in her room," Cassie said softly, closing the door behind him. "She's been excited all day." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest at the thought. He was still getting used to the idea that someone so small could be waiting for him, that he was becoming an important part of someone's world in a way that had nothing to do with business or success. He followed Cassie down the hall, stopping in the doorway of a room that was unmistakably Emmy's. The walls were a soft pastel pink, decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars and drawings that looked like they had been made by small hands. A bookshelf filled with colorful storybooks stood against the wall, next to a small bed covered in a floral-patterned blanket. And there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Emmy. She looked up the moment she saw him, her bright blue eyes lighting up. "You came," she said, scrambling to her feet. Ethan smiled. "Of course I did." Emmy grabbed his hand, tugging him toward a tiny plastic tea set arranged in the middle of the floor. "We're having a tea party," she announced. "You have to sit here." Ethan glanced at Cassie, who was standing by the doorway with her arms crossed, watching them. She didn't say anything, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. He lowered himself onto the floor, sitting awkwardly on the small rug as Emmy handed him a tiny pink teacup. "You have to pretend it's real," she instructed, lifting her own cup with exaggerated elegance. Ethan fought back a smile and mimicked her movements. "This is the best tea I've ever had," he said seriously. Emmy giggled. "It's not real, silly." Cassie let out a quiet laugh from where she stood, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt something shift in the air between them. He had spent so long being angry at her for keeping Emmy a secret, but now, watching the way she looked at their daughter, he realized something. She hadn't done it to hurt him. She had done it to protect Emmy, to give her a stable life without the chaos that came with his world. He still wasn't sure if he could ever fully forgive her, but for the first time, he understood. They spent the afternoon playing in Emmy's room. She showed him every stuffed animal she owned, made him color in one of her books, and even insisted on reading him a story, even though she stumbled over some of the bigger words. Ethan listened intently, memorizing every little thing about her. At some point, Emmy climbed onto his lap, settling against him as she flipped through another book. Ethan barely breathed, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever magic was happening. He had spent years believing that he wasn't the kind of man meant for family life, that his world was too fast-paced, too demanding. But right now, sitting on the floor of his daughter's bedroom, with her small hands resting on his arm, he felt something he had never felt before. He felt home. Cassie must have sensed it too, because when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "She likes you." Ethan looked up at her. "Yeah." Cassie nodded. "She doesn't warm up to people easily. But with you, it's like she's known you forever." Ethan swallowed hard, feeling something tighten in his chest. "I want to be here, Cassie. For her." Cassie held his gaze for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "I know." For the first time since he had found out about Emmy, she wasn't fighting him. She wasn't trying to push him away. And for the first time, Ethan believed that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at being something more than just fragments of a broken past. Maybe they had a chance at being a family. Ethan had always thought that success was measured in numbers. The size of his company, the value of his investments, the deals he closed, these were the things that had defined him for years. But now, as he stood in Cassie's kitchen, watching Emmy carefully place stickers onto a sheet of paper with the same level of focus he once reserved for contract negotiations, he realized that success might look completely different than he had imagined. It had been 2 weeks since Cassie had let him into their lives, and in that time, he had come to understand just how much he had missed. He had thought he could step in and make up for lost time, but fatherhood wasn't something that could be built overnight. It was in the small moments, the way Emmy reached for his hand without thinking, the way she called his name excitedly when she saw him, the way she whispered "good night" when he left. Each moment felt like a step forward, a tiny piece of proof that he was slowly becoming part of her world. Tonight, Cassie had invited him over for dinner. It was a simple thing, something that should have felt casual, but to Ethan, it meant everything. Sitting at a dinner table with his daughter, eating a meal that wasn't catered or delivered to his office, was a kind of normalcy he had never imagined for himself. Emmy sat between them, happily chatting about her day at preschool while stabbing at her pasta with a fork that was far too big for her small hands. Cassie listened with a soft smile, occasionally glancing at Ethan as if trying to gauge his reaction to this new version of his life. "She told her teacher today that she has two daddies," Cassie said suddenly, her voice laced with amusement. Ethan raised an eyebrow, looking at Emmy. "Oh yeah?" Emmy nodded, completely unfazed. "I told them I have my daddy, Mr. Hop." Cassie laughed, shaking her head. Mr. Hop is her stuffed rabbit, in case you were wondering. Ethan chuckled, feeling some of the tension in his chest ease. "Good to know I have competition." Emmy tilted her head, considering. "You're bigger than Mr. Hop. And you saved me. So maybe you can be my real daddy, and he can just be my bedtime daddy." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to say it, to acknowledge him as something more than just a visitor in her life. He looked at Cassie, searching for her reaction, but she only watched Emmy with an unreadable expression. "You sure about that, kiddo?" he asked carefully. Emmy nodded. "Yeah. Mr. Hop can't reach the top shelf, but you can. That's important." Ethan swallowed past the lump in his throat. "That is very important." Cassie stood, gathering the empty plates and carrying them to the sink. Ethan instinctively moved to help, but she shook her head. "I've got it. You should put her to bed." Ethan hesitated. "Are you sure?" Cassie nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I think she'd like that." Ethan turned to Emmy, who was already reaching for his hand. "Come on, Daddy," she said, the word slipping out so naturally that it nearly knocked the air from his lungs. He followed her to her room, taking in the small details he hadn't noticed before. The books lined up perfectly on her shelf, the way her blankets were slightly rumpled from where she had probably jumped on them earlier, the tiny pair of shoes tucked neatly beside her dresser. It was a glimpse into the life he had missed, a reminder of how much he still had to learn. Emmy climbed into bed and grabbed Mr. Hop, hugging him tightly. Ethan sat beside her, unsure of what to do next. "What happens now?" he asked. "You have to tuck me in," Emmy said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Ethan carefully pulled the blanket up to her chin, tucking it around her the way he had seen Cassie do. Emmy wiggled a little, getting comfortable, then looked up at him with sleepy blue eyes. "You have to say it," she mumbled. "Say what?" "The thing mommies and daddies say." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He leaned down, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, and whispered the words that suddenly meant more to him than anything else in the world. "Good night, sweetheart." Emmy sighed contentedly, her eyes fluttering closed. Within seconds, her breathing evened out, and Ethan sat there for a long moment, just watching her. When he finally stood and walked out of the room, Cassie was waiting for him in the hallway. "She loves you," she said softly. Ethan met her gaze. "I love her too." Cassie exhaled, her expression conflicted. "This isn't just about visits and playtime, Ethan. If you're really in this, it's for good. No walking away. No getting too busy. She doesn't deserve that." Ethan took a step closer, his voice firm. "I don't walk away from the things that matter. And she's the most important thing in my life now." Cassie studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Okay," she whispered. Ethan knew there was still a long road ahead. But tonight, as he stood in Cassie's apartment, hearing Emmy's soft breathing from the other room, he realized something. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was home. Ethan never thought that something as simple as a bedtime routine could change his perspective on life. But every evening he spent with Emmy, reading her stories, tucking her in, and listening to her sleepy little voice ask him questions about his day, felt like another piece of himself falling into place. He had spent years believing that his success was measured by numbers, by business deals, by the expansion of his company. But now, he was starting to realize that true success might be measured in the way Emmy smiled when she saw him, in the way she reached for his hand without thinking, in the quiet, unspoken trust that was growing between them. Cassie had been hesitant at first, careful about how much time she let him spend with Emmy. But after weeks of proving himself, she had started to let down her guard. The visits became longer. Dinners became a routine. Ethan found himself more familiar with the layout of Cassie's apartment than he was with his own penthouse. His life had started shifting in ways he never anticipated, and for the first time, he wasn't resisting it. One evening, after Emmy had fallen asleep, Ethan sat in the living room with Cassie, a cup of coffee in his hands. She was curled up on the couch across from him, looking exhausted but content. He had noticed how hard she worked, how much she carried on her own, and he had started to wonder how she had managed all of it without him for so long. "She really loves having you here," Cassie said, her voice quiet. Ethan looked up from his coffee, meeting her gaze. "I love being here." Cassie hesitated, then sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I never wanted to keep her from you," she admitted. "I told myself I was doing the right thing. That I was protecting her. But the truth is, I was scared. I was scared you wouldn't want this. That you'd feel trapped. That one day, you'd decide this wasn't what you wanted and leave, and I couldn't let her go through that." Ethan set his coffee down, leaning forward. "Cassie, I get why you did what you did. But I need you to hear me when I say that I'm not going anywhere. I missed too much already, and I won't let that happen again." She nodded slowly, but there was still something in her eyes, something unresolved. "I believe you," she said. "But this isn't just about Emmy. It's about us too." Ethan exhaled, running a hand over his face. "I know." Cassie hesitated before continuing. "We were good together once," she said softly. "And then we weren't. I don't know if we can go back to what we were." Ethan studied her, taking in the way she looked at him, cautious, unsure, but not closed off. "I don't want to go back," he said honestly. "I want to move forward. With you. With Emmy. With whatever this is." Cassie looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sweater. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Ethan nodded, leaning back. "Then we'll take it one step at a time. Just like we're doing with Emmy." Cassie looked at him again, and for the first time, he saw something in her expression that made his heart beat a little faster. Hope. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't dismiss it either. Instead, she gave him a small, almost shy smile. One step at a time. It wasn't everything. But it was a start. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan had always believed that happiness was something you had to earn, something that came only after years of work, sacrifice, and relentless ambition. He had spent most of his life chasing it in the form of success, in the endless pursuit of something bigger, something greater. But sitting in Cassie's apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, watching Emmy dance barefoot across the living room in her pajamas, he realized that happiness had been right here all along, in the moments he had never allowed himself to have. The past few months had changed everything. What had started as cautious, carefully scheduled visits had turned into something more natural, something real. He no longer felt like a guest in his daughter's life. He was part of it now, woven into the fabric of her days in a way that felt permanent. She no longer hesitated before reaching for his hand. She no longer looked to Cassie for reassurance when he was around. She trusted him, in the quiet, unconditional way that only children could. This morning, Cassie had made pancakes, and they had sat together at the small kitchen table, Emmy happily swinging her feet as she covered hers in syrup. Ethan had never been a breakfast person, had always rushed through his mornings, too focused on his schedule to care about things like pancakes or syrup-covered fingers. But today, he had let Emmy smear syrup across his plate as she tried to cut his pancakes for him, laughing when she got more on the table than on his fork. He had never known mornings could feel like this. After breakfast, Emmy had decided it was time for a dance party. She turned on music from one of her favorite cartoons and twirled across the room, holding her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hop, in one hand. Cassie sat beside Ethan on the couch, sipping her coffee, watching their daughter with a soft smile. "She does this every weekend," Cassie said, her voice warm with affection. "She says it's how she starts the day with good energy." Ethan chuckled. "That's a solid strategy." Emmy suddenly stopped mid-spin and turned to face them. "You have to dance too." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, do I?" Emmy nodded, hands on her hips, completely serious. "Yes. Mommy too. Family dance party." Ethan glanced at Cassie, who sighed dramatically before setting down her coffee. "Well, if it's a requirement." She stood, holding out a hand to Ethan. For a second, he hesitated, caught off guard by the gesture. It was such a small thing, but it felt like more. Slowly, he reached out, taking her hand as she pulled him to his feet. Emmy cheered, clapping her hands before grabbing each of them and spinning them in circles. Ethan wasn't sure when was the last time he had danced, let alone in the middle of a living room with a 4-year-old leading the way, but he found that he didn't care. Cassie was laughing, Emmy was beaming, and for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't thinking about work or the future or what came next. He was just here, in this moment, with them. When the song ended, Emmy collapsed onto the couch in a fit of giggles, and Cassie fell beside her, breathless from laughter. Ethan sat down next to them, feeling something settle inside him, something he hadn't even realized was still restless. Emmy climbed onto his lap, resting her head against his chest. "That was the best dance party ever," she mumbled sleepily. Ethan smiled, wrapping an arm around her small frame. "Yeah, I think so too." Cassie watched them, something unreadable in her expression. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, Cassie said, "I think we're going to be okay." Ethan looked at her, his heart tightening in his chest. He had spent so much time wondering if he would ever get to this moment, if he would ever be more than just a visitor in their lives. And now, sitting here with Emmy curled against him and Cassie looking at him like maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in him again, he knew the answer. They already were. The ending of this story is more than just a resolution, it's a transformation. Ethan starts as a man who believes success is measured by power and wealth, but by the time the story ends, he realizes that true success is about love, connection, and the moments that can't be bought or planned. His journey isn't just about discovering he has a daughter, it's about proving he's worthy of being in her life, of making up for lost time, and of rebuilding trust with Cassie. What makes this ending satisfying is that it doesn't rely on grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, it finds its power in the small, everyday moments, the family breakfast, the dance party, the quiet acknowledgement between two people who once lost each other but found their way back. Cassie's final words, "I think we're going to be okay," carry so much weight because they're not just about her and Ethan. They're about the family they've become, the second chances they've embraced, and the life they're finally building together. This story isn't just about romance or fatherhood, it's about redemption. It's about a man learning that being present matters more than being perfect. It's about a mother letting go of fear and a little girl who unknowingly heals the wounds of the past simply by existing. And in the end, it's about love, not the kind that's rushed or forced, but the kind that grows, step by step, until it becomes unshakable.